In February 1987, Hollywood released 11 films back to back to back, and not a single one turned a profit. 11 in 1 month. That's not bad luck. That's an industry-wide meltdown disguised as a release calendar, and the names attached to these disasters? Stallone, Fox, Altman, Hopkins, directors who changed cinema, stars at the peak of their fame, all of them stumbling into the same black hole of a month. Here's what went wrong with every single one of them. Light of Day, released February 6th, had everything going for it on paper. Michael J. Fox at the absolute peak of his fame. Joan Jett in her film debut, a title song written by Bruce Springsteen, director Paul Schrader, who wrote Taxi Driver, and it's still disappointed, earning somewhere between $9 and $10 million domestically. A significant underperformance for a Fox vehicle at a time when he was one of the biggest draws in Hollywood. But the Springsteen connection is the real story here. In 1981, Schrader sent Springsteen a screenplay titled Born in the USA, hoping he'd star in it. Springsteen turned down the acting role, but took the title for a song he was already working on. When the album made that title unusable for the film, Springsteen wrote Just Around the Corner to the Light of Day as compensation. Schrader loved it so much he renamed the entire movie. Joan Jett performed the track, which reached number 33 on the Billboard Hot 100. The film was filmed in Chicago and Cleveland and even features a young Trent Reznor in a cameo with the band Exotic Birds. But critics found the tone all over the place. Roger Ebert noted it couldn't decide whether it was a blue-collar story, a family drama, or a rock and roll movie. That identity crisis kept audiences away. Still, there's a nice postscript. Michael J. Fox's foundation has benefited from Light of Day charity concerts organized by Springsteen over the years. So the connection between these two endured long after the box office receipts were forgotten. Dead of Winter, also released February 6th, marks the quiet end of a legendary filmmaking career. Director Arthur Penn made Bonnie and Clyde one of the most influential American films ever produced. He made Little Big Man. He made Night Moves. And this thriller, which earned roughly $2.2 million at the domestic box office, was essentially his final wide theatrical release. The production history is messy. Penn wasn't even the first director. Mark Schmooger started the film but ran into difficulties. John Bloomgarden briefly took over. Then executive Alan Ladd Jr. brought in Penn to salvage the project. It was a loose remake of the 1945 film My Name is Julia Ross, with Mary Steenburgen playing 3 different roles alongside Roddy McDowall. Penn was already coming off a string of commercial failures, and this one didn't reverse the trend. But here's where the story takes a turn. Dead of Winter holds a 77% on Rotten Tomatoes. Critics praised Steenburgen's triple performance. Over the years, the film has developed a devoted following, often compared favorably to Misery for its isolated snowy setting and psychological tension. Scream Factory released a special edition Blu-ray in 2017. Penn's only other theatrical film after this, Penn and Teller Get Killed in 1989, received almost no distribution. He spent his remaining years in theater and television, serving as president of the Actors Studio from 1992 to 2000. The director of Bonnie and Clyde, finishing his career in a film most people have never heard of. That's Hollywood. From the Hip, also released February 6th, is remembered today for one reason that has nothing to do with its quality. The screenplay was written as a hobby by a Boston real estate attorney named David E. Kelly. This was his first produced script. He'd go on to create L.A. Law, The Practice, Ally McBeal, Boston Legal, and Big Little Lies. So while the movie flopped, the writer's career turned out just fine. The film itself starred Judd Nelson as an outrageous young lawyer and earned roughly $7 to $9 million against a $9 million budget. Opening weekend brought $2.6 million from 970 screens. Nelson received a Razzie nomination for Worst Actor, though he lost. Gene Siskel gave it 0 stars. The LA Times called it such an embarrassingly lame comedy that you could easily imagine some mischievous attorney filing suit for defamation of the entire profession. That's a scorching review. Director Bob Clark is a fascinating figure here. He directed A Christmas Story, one of the most beloved holiday films ever made. He also directed Porky's and Black Christmas. He's one of only 2 directors in history to have films on both Roger Ebert's great movies and most hated lists, which honestly tells you everything about the range and inconsistency of his career. From the Hip sits firmly on the wrong side of that divide, but it gave David E. Kelly a career. So, at least there's that. The Good Father, released February 11th, is proof that critical acclaim means nothing without distribution. Anthony Hopkins delivered what many scholars consider one of the finest performances of his pre-Silence of the Lambs career. Roger Ebert gave it 3.5 out of 4 stars. Vincent Canby praised Hopkins as an actor wired with enough explosives to wipe out half of London. And almost nobody in America saw it. The film's widest release was 17 theaters. 17. Its total domestic gross was $421,201. Opening weekend brought in $20,361 from just 2 screens. This was a British production made for Channel 4 with a screenplay by Christopher Hampton, who would later win an Oscar for Dangerous Liaisons. The cast included a young Jim Broadbent and Stephen Fry in what was his first credited film role. All that talent funneled through tiny distributor Skouras Pictures into a release so limited it barely qualified as theatrical. But here's the thing, this film holds an 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's genuinely good. Film historians describe it as the best Anthony Hopkins performance you've never heard of. The problem was never quality. The problem was that a small British drama about a bitter divorce had no path to American multiplexes in February 1987. It was the wrong film in the wrong country at the wrong time. And $421,000 was all it had to show for it. 84 Charing Cross Road, released February 13th, is a film that exists in a strange space between critical success and commercial irrelevance. Anne Bancroft stars alongside Anthony Hopkins in an epistolary drama about a New York book lover's decades-long correspondence with a London bookseller. It holds an 85% on Rotten Tomatoes. Bancroft won the BAFTA for Best Actress. Hopkins won Best Actor at the Moscow International Film Festival, and it made $1,083,486 total. Opening weekend, $24,350 from one theater. Its widest release never exceeded 24 screens. The real story behind the film involves Mel Brooks. He purchased the rights to Helene Hanf's memoir as an anniversary gift for his wife, Anne Bancroft. Hugh Whitemore expanded the 2-person stage play into a full screenplay, adding characters including Judi Dench as the bookseller's wife. Dench has said publicly this is one of her favorite films. The problem wasn't the movie. The problem was asking mainstream American audiences to sit through a quiet literary drama about letters between continents in the same month Platoon was dominating screens. The budget remains unconfirmed, but with a cast this accomplished and a limited release strategy, losses were likely modest. Among book lovers, 84 Charing Cross Road has become a genuine cult classic. But in February 1987, it was invisible. And then there's Over the Top, also released February 13th, the crown jewel of February 1987's failures. Sylvester Stallone was paid $12 million to star in this film. At the time, that was the highest salary ever paid to a movie star. Period. The total budget was $25 million. The domestic gross was $16 million. Stallone's paycheck alone was worth more than the film earned in every theater in America combined. Let that sink in for a second. The concept is beautifully absurd. Stallone plays a long-haul trucker trying to reconnect with his estranged son while competing in a professional arm wrestling tournament. They essentially tried to do the Rocky formula with arm wrestling instead of boxing. Menahem Golan of Cannon Films directed. Giorgio Moroder produced a soundtrack featuring Kenny Loggins, Sammy Hagar, and Eddie Money. They even created a real over-the-top arm wrestling tournament to promote the release. The commitment to the premise was total, and the fallout was massive. The film was produced by Cannon Group, which had already lost $60 million the previous year and required a $75 million emergency bailout from Warner Brothers. Over the Top was one of 4 big budget flops that destroyed the company entirely. By 1988, Cannon faced bankruptcy. Meanwhile, co-star David Mendenhall, who was just a kid, won 2 Golden Raspberry Awards, Worst Supporting Actor and Worst New Star. Making a child one of the ceremony's most decorated winners is honestly uncomfortable, no matter how you look at it. But here's what nobody expected. Over the Top has become a cult classic. The same qualities that made critics dismiss it in 1987, the over-the-top sincerity, the ridiculous premise, the peak 80s excess, are exactly what makes audiences love it today. Stallone himself reflected on it years later, saying he would have made it less glossy and not used a never-ending stream of rock songs. He went through a career slump after this that lasted until Cliffhanger in 1993. 6 years in the wilderness, all because he thought arm wrestling could be the next boxing. Next up is Death Before Dishonor, a military action film released February 20th starring Fred Dryer. If that name sounds familiar, it's because Dryer was the star of NBC's Hunter at the time. This was his chance at becoming a movie star. It didn't work. The film earned $3.7 million against a $5 million budget. Opening weekend pulled $1.8 million from 776 screens, but audiences vanished fast. Over 40% of the total gross came from that first weekend alone. What makes this one interesting is the production. It was originally set to film in Yugoslavia, but producer Lawrence Kubik reportedly received a threatening phone call and moved the entire production to Israel. The film was directed by Terry J. Leonard, a legendary stunt coordinator making his first and only feature, and the reviews were rough. Roger Ebert dismissed it as a textbook example of a formulaic military picture with not a lick of original thinking in it. The film later ended up in Jack Shaheen's Real Bad Arabs as an example of stereotypical portrayals, which honestly is about the only cultural conversation it ever generated. Dryer went right back to television. The cinema score was actually an A-, which tells you audiences who showed up liked it fine. The problem was almost nobody showed up. Morgan Stewart's Coming Home, also released February 20th, is one of those productions so troubled it reads like a cautionary tale. It carries the notorious Alan Smithee directing credit, which in Hollywood was the official pseudonym used when a director wanted their name taken off a project entirely. That should tell you everything. The film started filming in August 1985 under director Terry Windsor. 4 weeks in, Windsor was fired. Paul Aaron came in to replace him and refilmed much of the footage. Then, the finished product sat on a shelf for over a year. When it finally came out, Aaron requested his name be removed. The result was Alan Smithee, a ghost directing a movie nobody wanted, and the box office numbers reflect that chaos. Opening weekend, $48,438. That's not a typo. $48,000 from 28 theaters. It eventually expanded to 344 screens and limped to $2.1 million total against a $7 million budget. It holds a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes from 5 reviews. The New York Times wrote that it was hard to imagine any adult sitting through this movie without dozing off. Star John Cryer, fresh off Pretty in Pink, survived this one. He'd go on to lasting fame with 2.5 Men. But this was a career speed bump disguised as a feature film. Square Dance might be the single most puzzling flop on this entire list. Also released February 20th, it stars Jason Robards, Jane Alexander, a young Winona Ryder, and Rob Lowe. The talent is undeniable. The results are staggering. It earned $225,358 against a $4 million budget. That means it recovered exactly 5.6% of what it cost to make. Just devastating. But the behind-the-scenes story is where it gets interesting. The film was produced by Michael Nesmith of The Monkees, who put up $2.5 million of the budget. NBC Co. financed the rest, marking the network's first ever investment in a theatrical feature. Originally, Gregory Peck and Emilio Estevez were cast. Peck dropped out and was replaced by Robards. Estevez left for another project but passed the script to his friend Rob Lowe, who accepted 1/20th of his usual salary and spent time with special needs adults to prepare for his role. And here's what gets me every time. Lowe's performance earned a Golden Globe nomination for Best Supporting Actor at the 45th ceremony. He lost to Sean Connery for The Untouchables, which is respectable company. The film even opened the 1987 Sundance Film Festival. All that prestige, all that talent, all that preparation, and it made $225,000. Now, Winona Ryder's role here is often called her breakthrough, but that's a stretch. Tim Burton cast her in Beetlejuice after seeing Lucas, not Square Dance. Still, her natural screen presence was already evident. The real story here isn't who was in it. It's that a film this stacked could vanish so completely. Beyond Therapy, released February 27th, represents one of the lowest points in Robert Altman's legendary career. And for a filmmaker who made MASH in Nashville, that's saying something. The film earned $790,000 total against a $3.5 million budget. It opened to $286,840 and carries a 17% on Rotten Tomatoes. The production was troubled from the start. It was based on Christopher Durang's successful off-Broadway play, which should have been a solid foundation. Carol Burnett and Alan Arkin were originally attached to star, but they dropped out and were replaced by Glenda Jackson and Tom Conti. Then Altman essentially threw out Durang's screenplay and wrote his own version. Durang later described the whole experience as very unhappy. The film was filmed entirely in Paris despite being set in New York, because Altman was living there at the time. This matters because of context. After Popeye in 1980, studios had turned their backs on Altman, considering his style too unconventional and unmarketable. Throughout the entire decade, he worked on low-budget stage adaptations, struggling to get anything made. Beyond Therapy is often cited alongside Quintet as his worst film. Roger Ebert gave it 1 star and said it was killed by terminal whimsy, which is honestly one of the best one-line takedowns in film criticism history. Altman's comeback wouldn't arrive until The Player in 1992. 5 more years in the wilderness after this one. We close with number 1 with a Bullet, a buddy cop film from Cannon Films, also released on February 27th. And honestly, it might be the most forgotten movie on this entire list. It earned just $410,952 at the domestic box office. Total, not opening weekend. Total. It opened on 228 screens and pulled in roughly $210,000 its first weekend. That's less than a mid-range house in 1987 dollars. But here's the detail that stings the most. Director Jack Smite originally wanted Denzel Washington for the co-lead. Cannon's Menahem Golan rejected Washington because he supposedly lacked star power. Instead, they cast Robert Carradine, best known as the lead nerd from Revenge of the Nerds, in what was supposed to be a tough guy Mel Gibson-type role. Think about that for a second. They passed on a future 2-time Oscar winner for the guy from a college comedy. The result was predictable. Carradine and Billy D. Williams had what critics described as zero on-screen chemistry. Director Smite himself later admitted the film never saw the light of day. And here's the real kicker. It came out exactly 1 week before Lethal Weapon redefined the entire buddy cop genre. So, even if number 1 with a Bullet had been decent, it was walking straight into a buzzsaw. But it wasn't decent. And Cannon Films was already hemorrhaging money. This was just another drop in a very expensive bucket. February 1987 produced 11 commercial failures in a row, while Platoon, which cost just $6 million, earned nearly $50 million that same month on its way to Best Picture. The lesson was simple, but the industry kept forgetting it. The right story told, well, always beat star power, and big budgets aimed at the wrong idea. Some of these films deserved better. Some deserved exactly what they got, and a few of them, decades later, found the audiences that 1987 never gave them.